Welcome back, everybody, to the Thrivestry podcast, mastering the art of thriving at life, where we talk about creating change in our lives and in the world around us. This is your host, JJ. This is my co-host, Gigi. Say hi, Gigi.
Hi.
And Gigi's voice is a little shaky today. She had a ton of fun over the last week, going to cabins and pool parties and stuff. So if her voice sounds a little scratchy, that's because she was having so much fun. But welcome to the season 1 finale. So I wish I had like fireworks shooting off or like those party things. Yeah. But this is episode 20 of the podcast. Hopefully you guys have been tuning in and following along with us. If you guys are joining us now, you can always go back and catch all those other podcasts. And I do recommend you take advantage of that because we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we went over, some of our favorite points. But we're going to be doing something different in season 2. So you're going to hear some of the sneak preview stuff of that, but the big announcements you'll have to wait until season 2. But Gigi, what are your thoughts about the podcast up till now?
Well, I'm glad that we did it. I know that this was something that I was trying to talk you into doing for a really long time. JJ and I are great friends, and we spend many hours on the phone debating things in the fitness industry. And I kept saying, he really kind of dragged his feet on doing this podcast. And every time we would have one of our epic conversations for hours about whatever it was, the latest fitness trend, I'd just be like, see, there's a podcast right there. That's another missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And actually we were able to kind of capture that, which I thought was really cool. And I know that there was at least one occasion that I could think of where a discussion that you and I had just on the phone, we were like, okay, let's just stop here and we'll bring it. And this is what we'll talk about next week on the podcast. So that was really cool. I think that there's a lot of, there's a wealth of knowledge from the two of us that, if we're just talking to each other, it doesn't really get out there,
Yeah, and it's not just us; it's stuff because you and I love to read and we consume a lot of material, and I can only distribute it so much through my articles, my writing, and so I really like being able to distill that information down and bring it to you guys so that you can actually have action items and things to do. So that's the season 1 has always been kind of the theme of we're going to take some sort of way of changing creating change in our lives in actionable items. And then, of course, analyzing some of the stuff that we're reading and some of the stuff that we're seeing come out from the media or from research. And so that was so that's what I really liked about it. So I'm on the same page.
Yeah. So it's been awesome. So, I mean, as far as favorite episodes go, the one that I use the most in my day-to-day life, in terms of what I use for clients. So the one that I'm like, oh, you need to go listen to this podcast, is the one where we talked about the OODA loop. So orient, observe, orient, decide, act. And going through that process with my clients, whether they be in the business development world or the fitness world, whether they're actual personal training clients or whatever, it really helps to get people to kind of stop and take a breath. And it was such a great tool. Because remember, and if you go back and you listen to that podcast, you'll hear me say halfway through, I think like this. This is how I do things. But I never had a tool, right? And I never had that that actual thing where I could say, but wait a second, where are you right now? And where do you want to be? And how does this next action that you're thinking about jumping into, how does that help you? Do we know how hard you're going to need to work or how much time or how much money you need to invest in it? And so that's the one that I use the most.
That was Thrivestry podcast 15.
There you go. Yeah. The OODA loop and how people around us affect our behavior. Oh, that was a good discussion too about making sure that I won't spoil it. You have to go back and listen to it. But that's definitely the one that I'm go and listen to this, learn how to make decisions. Because otherwise you're just reacting to everything, right? And you can't live your life reactively and expect to have any kind of momentum, any of your own choice, right? You can certainly live your life reactionary all you want, but then you'll never end up in a direction that you want to live it in because you'll only ever be reacting to outside forces instead of having your own compass. So I really like that one. The one that I had the most fun on was the one where you couldn't say any of the words. I don't remember which one that one was. I think that was the one with the flowers. Yeah, that was a good one. It was the one with the flowers where we talked about the benefits of having fresh cut flowers in your home. And so that was a really good one too. I really enjoyed that one. But the one that I thought had like the most poignant piece, and if you're new to the fitness industry, or if you're new to working out, or if you're new to following this podcast, that I would start with, that really like kind of what this podcast is all about, and how to, it's like almost like a, I don't want to say life hack because that's so cliche to say that, but almost a hack. Is the one where we talked about lifestyle, and then you came up with a really cool graphic for that too. Principles, lifestyle.
Yeah, we did that. That was the last two episodes. So 18 and 19 were the principles, or identity principles, and decision fatigue.
Yeah, and I love that one because again, I'm a single mom, and so I'm always on default. Like I'm consistently running on default unless I specifically am like, this activity, I brought a new child work, that's when I have to like turn on and be actively involved in, but I can't be actively involved mentally in every single thing day to day because I would just lose my mind. So that process that you did such a great job of designing and illustrating in the graphic, which we're going to go through all the graphics later on this show. I love that one. That one was really good. I thought that was awesome. Cool. And how about you?
Yeah. My favorite part is when the internet connection's stable and you're coming through well, because some of that was a little slurred. But hopefully you guys understood everything she said. I understood it, but yeah, my favorite ones have always been the habit ones, where I'm explaining, these little changes that you can do or little tools and tricks that you can do to change your habits and your behavior. But then I found myself, it's funny because when I did this podcast, I didn't really want to get into a lot of the programming stuff, but I forget how much goes into the programming because I do it every day, and I don't necessarily believe that everyone's going to geek out on it like I do, and so I didn't think that would be a good thing to talk about. But then I realized, I can, if I do a good job in explaining it, it's great because I can refer back to it, and you guys as coaches can even share it with members who are curious or want more information about sort of the planning and all the back end stuff and the why we do the things the way we do. And so that's why in season 2 we're going to focus a little bit more on the programming, and we're going to break out different pieces of the class experience and different parts of why I program the way I do and how I came up with that. And so that ended up being some of my favorite ones. So for this season was actually where I got to talk about the strengths focus, and I got to talk about why it's so important that we do those things. And the other thing I like doing is I like having these neat graphics. As much work as it is to create these, I do like having a cool little visual to kind of get my thoughts across, right? I think it just helps explain, people understand what I'm trying to get across. So on that note, let's do the lightning round of a bunch of graphics that I've used on the podcast. And I think there's a few mixed in here that we haven't talked about, so we may see these in season 2. But and then actually after that, for you guys waiting along, this is my 15th year anniversary of doing CrossFit. So 15 years ago, in July of 2004, was my very first experience doing CrossFit workouts, and I've pretty much been doing it ever since. A couple times I might have had 3 or 4 weeks off for different reasons, but I've always come back to it. And I wanted to talk about that, and I'm going to write an article, but I'm also wanted to do the preview. This is purely for more views on YouTube, right? So for you guys listening, I just showed my abs. What's fascinating about that is and I don't want to we'll talk about it after the graphics, but I started CrossFit when I was 24, and I'm turning 40 this year. So you think about all the people who are afraid of CrossFit or say it's dangerous or whatever. I want to talk about some of the experiences I've had and what I've learned over that journey, and then it's going to be this article. But let's jump over to the all the neat graphics that we've used. So for you guys listening in, we'll we'll talk about them as we go. And so you guys aren't totally tuned out. The first one here is generalized movement quality over time in intense circuit training. And so it's basically just a real simple graph of a curve that starts high on the left and it goes down. On the left, it has higher quality movement, good quality movement, and then down at the bottom is danger zone, and then it's over time. And this was an early graphic that I used to try to explain to people that, you know, when you're doing workouts, especially ones that don't have scheduled rests in them, and it's, you know, a 20-minute Metcon, the quality of movement decreases as you fatigue. That's the difference between skill practice or skill acquisition and conditioning. Is the longer you go into conditioning, the movement quality tends to go down. Now you can slow down significantly and keep moving, you know, with perfect form, but then you lose the intensity. And so it's this balancing act. And this is one of the reasons why we do so many workouts in that 5 to 15 minute range is really common for us, because once you start getting past 15 minutes, you're getting less of a return on your investment, because you're still conditioning your body, but you're also performing the movements with not as good form, which is bad for long-term technique development. It also puts you at more risk for injuries or tweaks. And so you know, it's okay. It's good to do workouts over, you know, 15, 20, even 30 minutes, but we want to make sure we mix in some rests, and we want to make sure that it's intelligent workout design. How much on the next set? I don't know if we ever talked about this too. You know, when you're doing the max effort style where you adjust the load each set, you know, if the set felt good, you want to go up in weight. If it felt okay, maybe it wasn't perfect or it was really hard, you might stay the same weight. Or if your set was really heavy, then or you couldn't finish all the reps prescribed, you would go down in weight. And so I created a graphic for that. And fast versus best. This is revolving around the scaling guide that we do. So one of the things that makes Thrivestry unique is that we don't just tell you to do the workout or give you a time cap. We actually tell people specifically how, you know, in a time frame, how long it should take to do each round and how long it should take to do the entire workout, so they can scale properly. And so the idea is that you're always adjusting and tweaking the workout excuse me, so that if you make it too easy, then you're going to go too fast and you're not going to get the right stimulus. If you make it too hard, you're going to slow way down or risk injury, and you're not going to get the right stimulus. So how do you balance that out? And it's the idea is you increase the movement difficulty, whether that's load or how advanced the movement is or the number of reps, and you may make things easier. You know, sometimes you might scale the workout down so that, again, you end up right in the middle of the scaling guide. So you don't go too fast or do too many rounds, or you go too long and not enough. Testing maxes all of the time or banking gains for later. This is really a graphic around. Hang on a second. All right, back to the sharing of the graphic. All right, so the idea is that people will sometimes max out, like do their true 1 rep max, just in a regular class, and that's not necessarily especially when we're talking about heaviest loads. Not necessarily, you know, a max set of pull-ups, and unless you're doing, you know, more than 30 or 40, probably isn't going to affect your training too much. But testing out your 1 rep max deadlift or back squat can really affect your ability to for days after, maybe even a week after, and kind of put you in a danger zone. And so this graphic kind of shows that. And, you know, it's okay to set a new personal record for your back squat, and you know, maybe you do 10 pounds more than your lifetime max, and you know you could do more, but you stop and you bank the gains for later. You say, you know what, I set a new PR, I'm happy. That way you're back to baseline sooner, and you can continue with your training instead of being at a risk for injury and maybe you having to take days off because you really tested yourself. And it's okay to test yourself, but you just want to save those for maybe competitions or just a couple times per year. There was the Thrivestry program map, which shows these bubbles, these dots, kind of where all the different Thrivestry programs lie. And I think we talked about this with Anne when she was talking about the Spark program and the Propel program. And how all these programs overlap and are integrated. And this is something that I see a lot of gyms will start putting in extra classes, which I think is great because it gives people more options. But the problem is either you have to, a lot of times if they're completely separate programs, people can't go back and forth. And I really think it's great when people can customize their experience, because if the programs are integrated, then they can go to regular, CrossFit class or what I call the mastery program. And then once a week they can do Spark, or it's easy for them to transfer to competition programming because they're still doing some of the same things as the classes. So the competitors can still come to class once or twice a week, which I think is really important. And instead of having all these separate, almost like separate gyms in the same gym, and it creates that kind of clickiness and that division that that can cause problems. And I think most of you guys know isn't ideal, right? We want to keep people integrated as much as we can. Do we ever talk about the context in the podcast?
There's some of these that I don't remember at all. So I think you did them with Anne, or maybe just when I wasn't here, but I did not talk about context overview.
Yeah. So again, another kind of unique Thrivestry programming thing is that I actually tell people how you should approach the training that day. And there's a lot of people, a lot of programs where it's just, here's the workout. And they may say in the programming that day, they may say, this isn't, don't record anything today, or don't go as hard. Well, I do that every single day. So it's either a practice context, a competition context, or a mental toughness context. And so this is a pie chart, and the practice context text is scheduled 60% of the time. The competition is about 30% of the time, and mental toughness is 10% of the time. So about 6 out of 10 workouts are practice, 3 out of 10 are competition, and 1 out of 10 is mental toughness. And, it's just kind of understanding that, like, practice, our output is only going to be in that 80 to 95% range. We're really not going all out like we do in competition. Competition is always, as long as you're feeling good that day and everything, we want you to push hard. We want you to create a result that you can record so you can compare back to it later. And then mental toughness might be over 100%. You might go test your limits, but it also might be getting out of your comfort zone and saying, you know what, I'm going to make sure, today's, I'll write in there, today you got to make sure every rep is perfect. So you actually have to slow down and put your ego in check. So it's another way of testing mental toughness. We did talk about this. This is the 6-week strength focus chart where I show that how the Metcon volume and duration is high in the first 2 weeks of our 6-week strength focus, because we're lifting lighter. When we start a new strength focus, we have a little bit less lifting, and we end up doing because we're doing less lifting, and we need a little bit of a deload from finishing the last cycle. We schedule longer Metcons, a little bit more volume in those first 2 weeks. And then in the middle 2 weeks, it's a balance between lifting and strength. And then in the last 2 weeks, it's more, there's more strength, because now we're lifting on that strength lift. We're lifting in that kind of 90% range for reps. And so I dial back the Metcon for a couple of weeks. Not that we're still going to be doing, 15, 20-minute Metcons on days that we're not lifting, but there's just going to be less of those and less total Metcon. And so the strength intensity goes up over the 6 weeks, and then the Metcon volume goes down. And where this is really important to point out to people is that people who really like the long Metcons, they need to know that if they're feeling kind of, frustrated or whatever, because we've been doing a lot more lifting. And really, when I say a lot more, in the beginning, in the weeks 1 and 2, we'll do, 2 or 3 lifts in a week. And then on weeks 5 and 6, we might do 3 or 4, so it's not like they're not huge. And remember, people aren't coming 7 days a week. So most people in weeks 1 and 2 are going to get 1 to 2 lifts in their training if they're coming 3 or 4 days a week. And then on weeks 5 and 6, they're going to get more like 2 to 3 lifts done in the week. But sometimes they may say, hey, I feel like all we're doing is lifting, and I want to do long Metcons. You say, don't worry, in a week or 2, we'll be doing longer Metcons. And you get the same people on the opposite end of the bell curve who just want to lift more, and then they get frustrated in week 1 and 2 because of all the Metcon. And then you say, don't worry, in a week or 2, we'll be doing a lot more lifting and less Metcon. And then we also talked about this, which was our constantly varied sort of strength training, where the lifts are constantly rotating, which is a more traditional CrossFit style, versus the dedicated cycle. And the reason why CrossFit went into this sort of lifting more seemingly randomly, more just rotating through the lifts, not doing any lifts consistently week to week, was because you have new people coming in constantly, coming into classes, and if you're constantly in some sort of cycle, they're not going to get the best benefit. You also have people coming different days of the week, and you can't have a dedicated cycle if people are missing some of those days. The cycles don't work. They're too sensitive to that sort of thing. So that's why they did the constantly varied. But there's also benefits to the dedicated cycle too. It's easier to coach. It's really important for advanced people to have that consistency so they can make gains. Otherwise, they start to plateau. And there's a little bit faster adaptation when we train our bodies by doing the same movement, once or twice a week for 6 weeks. The body adapts to that stimulus better. And so I've combined those two, and I kind of just, came up with the sweet spot where we're going to do, I'll schedule it twice a week. So people are going to get it once or twice a week of the strength focus, and the progressions are created so that people are always making gains. And if they miss a session or two, it doesn't upset the benefits, right? At the same time, it's 6 weeks. And so that we're also doing other lifts mixed in so they don't get as bored, right? So that's the other problem with dedicated cycles. And so this graphic shows the strengths and the weaknesses of both the constantly varied and dedicated cycle. And then it shows kind of the sweet spot that we came up with.
How many more graphics are left?
3 or 4.
Well,
now we're getting to the good ones. We're getting to the good ones.
I was just saying that we totally didn't do this in like a lightning round. We're just going through all of them. And then I was thinking, maybe I'll time you. I'll give you like a minute.
No, this is good. So here's one of JG's favorite graphics, which is the Venn diagram of strength, cardio, skill, and play. And the 4 things I sort of chose, and you could pick 4 different things, or you could get more granular with it. But then the Venn diagram would be almost unreadable. So these are 4 that I find are really important, that we want to balance the strength training, the skill training, the playing, and cardio all together, and we put Thrivestry in the middle. And the way I look at it is, and if you use these 4 sort of categories, you can look at almost anything in life that you're going to do physically, and they'll kind of fall somewhere on this chart. Cardio is running or spin class, and skill is golf and yoga. Those are more pure. But then you start overlapping, and you might say, what's strength and skill? Well, it's Olympic weightlifting or strongman. Strength can be carved into raw strength, which is powerlifting, but there's also explosive strength and speed strength and all these other things. But in just calling strength as its own thing in general. And so this is one of our graphics that we use, and I think it really does kind of capture what we're trying to do with Thrivestry. And then Gigi's other favorite graphic is the OODA loop.
I don't have another favorite. This is my real favorite. The other one is my second favorite.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. I'll put that in as a caption to the on the graphic. Gigi's first favorite, Gigi's second favorite.
It's not definitive though. I'm sure there's more graphics to come in season 2, so that might change.
That could change. Yeah. So the observe, orient, decide, act. Observe is where you look at the data, right? You analyze kind of what has been happening up to this point, and you're actually consciously analyzing things. Then you're going to orient. Okay, where do I need to go? What needs to happen relative to this data? What numbers need to change? What things need to change? How long of a journey am I signing up for? And then decide, what are my options? And then decide is figure out what's the plan, what's the actual things, what are the actual points that I need to do it, and then you got to do it. That's the act, right? So then you actually have to follow through. But of course, when you're doing that, you need to make sure that you're tracking how successful you are, so that you have something to observe the next time you go around the loop, right? So the idea is this is a loop that is constantly going. And then our identity, principles, and actions, where it's the bullseye with the identity in the middle, the principles outside of that, and then kind of all other decisions outside of that. And the real summary of this one is, when it comes to making decisions or taking actions, if it's part of our identity, if it's something that is really at our core, we don't even have to think. There's no willpower required. We just do it, right? And that has positives and negatives. If our identity is it may be holding us back because we're trying to fight those identity things, then it's almost impossible to create that sort of change. And the next ring outside of that's principles. And the identity lies within our principles, but sometimes we pre-decide things, which is a principle that we live by. It's a rule of thumb. It's how we operate, 80-90% of the time. When the situation comes up, we've already made a decision about that. Those are a little bit easier to change, but it's also, if we're making decisions based on principles, again, it doesn't take as much willpower. And then anything outside of those two things makes it is harder to decide or follow, because it's not default, right? We don't just automatically decide. So then we have to actively think about things. And so the more we can understand where identity and principles are, the easier it is to use that willpower for other changes. I think that's the last one. Oh, and then there's the car with the bumper stickers. So
the CrossFit license plate.
Yeah, the CrossFit license plate. Yeah, so that was kind of the summary of some of the stuff. Again, you can go back and listen to those podcasts where we go into greater detail. It was a quasi lightning round. It was sort of
lightning round is not. I wouldn't call it a lightning round. Lightning rounds are supposed to be like jarringly fast, so that you start to kind of like lose your mind a little bit when you're doing it. And that I would say it was more of a
okay. But let's talk about, before we go into season 2 and some of the changes and some of the preview stuff for season 2, let's talk about my journey of 15 years of CrossFit. And this is what it did to my body. And which is kind of a clickbaity title that I want to use for this article, but I think it's important that I reach the most amount of people, because I do want people to understand, what they're signing up for, right? Or what they have, if they've been doing CrossFit for a few months or a few years, kind of what sort of things they can look forward to. Now, my journey is a little bit unique, because I was pretty fit when I started. I was competing in MMA, and I had, black belt and everything, but and I was doing a lot of body weight push-ups and air squats and things when I started. But I started when I was 24, and I'll be 40 this year. So it's an interesting, dissection of life when you're still in your 20s. You're still, you can recover quickly. You can your body's a lot more resilient, I believe. And as you start to approach the 40 year, that's when things are changing, right? And so I've definitely had to learn from that. I will say that I was fortunate that I started CrossFit when I did, because we didn't really know what we were doing. I'm talking about CrossFit. I'm talking about myself. We didn't understand the long-term effects of some of these workouts. And it was a lot of experimentation about, let's try this movement. Let's do this workout and see what happens. And it was really effective. But I also think there was, if I had Thrivestry when I started when I was 24, I'd be a totally different person now. I actually think I'd be more fit and more healthy than I am now if I had, 15 years of Thrivestry versus, the first 5 or 6 years was a lot more experimentation on myself and people I was training to figure out what were the best methods. And then that's been being refined over time, right? So the programming and the program design and the workout design has been adapting and improving over those years. And I think what we have now is really good. And I'm still tweaking it. I'm still trying to make, eke out a 0.1% of benefit wherever I can, which is the benefit of being a full-time programmer versus running a gym and programming at the same time. But I will say this, that my first CrossFit workout in July of 2004 was Tabata squats. So that was 30 seconds of air squats, 10 seconds rest for 8 rounds. That's 4 minutes. Then 4 minutes max muscle ups, then Tabata squats again. And if you guys have ever done Tabata squats, you realize how sore it makes you and how it causes so much damage to the muscles in the legs, right? We get those tears, which causes delayed onset muscle soreness. So doing 2 rounds of that, I probably did 400 squats in a 12-minute period. And luckily I was already doing a lot of those. I was doing the deck of cards. So I would do, I'd flip a card over, and if it was red, you do that number of push-ups. If it was black, I do that number of squats. And a couple times we even did the deck 2 times in a row, which is like 300 or 400 squats and push-ups. And so at least I had that. I probably gave myself a mild form of rhabdomyolysis, which I don't remember. There was no education around that back then. But I know I had trouble walking, and my legs were really, really sore for the next like 4 or 5 days. Like I was
That was a double code deck, the 400 squats, the double.
No, that was just doing Tabata squats twice in the same workout. And in my first round, the original Tabata squats, you would only count your lowest round. So I think I started with like 18 or 20 per set, because again I was really good at squats, and then by the end I was down to like 16. And then I don't remember on the second round, obviously I was probably even less, but still doing 16 squats for 8 sets and then doing that again for another 8 was just stupid. So 16 sets of 16 or so. And so that's probably my first. And what I tell people is, I was doing MMA. So when you're learning, especially jujitsu and things, when someone shows you a hold or something that hurts, and you're like, ow, oh, that hurts. Oh, show me that again. Do that again, because you kind of have this thing in your brain where it's like, well, that was uncomfortable for me, or I couldn't get out of it. Oh, I need to learn that. And so I think that really did attract me to CrossFit. I was like, I am destroyed. I had just had my first amateur MMA fight, and I was in the fittest I had been in probably my entire life. And I won my match, and then I didn't start CrossFit before that because I didn't want to affect my training and get hurt or something. And so right after that match, I came and did my first CrossFit workout, and I was just destroyed. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to learn this. And I will say that I was attracted to CrossFit because I had multiple black belts essentially, but I didn't understand fitness, and I wanted to get a black belt in fitness. And so I really wanted to understand the conditioning side. And so that's what attracted me to CrossFit. And I was sort of stalking it for a month or so before I did it. And
how did you find it? Like what was your first like?
There was a message board forum called Bullshido, which, and it's basically it was set up around martial artists, kind of like, talking about martial arts, but also just calling out all the bullshit in martial arts, right? It's so much bullshit. And so somebody had a signature, that they on the bottom of their post that said like, CrossFit, it's like cheating. So I was like, what is that? And so then, I looked it up, and they had their blog format where they post workouts, 3 days in a row, 1 day off. And I just started watching it and watching video. They didn't have videos. This was before YouTube. So what they had was slideshows. And so I remember trying to learn how to do a hang power snatch by watching a slideshow, or a squat snatch where it's like there's, frame 1, frame 2, and then all of a sudden he's under the bar, and it's like, yeah, I think you missed a step. That doesn't, trying to learn, it's like trying to learn from a book, right? Like, it was, so yeah, and it started on the patio of my apartment and doing it in the dojo. Everything was modified. I had, the only bar I could get was this, like, this narrow bar that had the screw on things on the side, right? So it had the threaded, where that was like the 1.5 inch diameter holes in the plates, and you had to screw it on, and there's metal plates. And I would hang that bar above my balcony, off my neighbor's balcony, off some chains. They never said anything, which was funny. But like my knuckles would hit the stucco wall, and I could kind of do strict pull-ups, kind of kipping pull-ups. And yeah, it was a fun time. But so there was tons of modifications going on. And that was really my first sort of foray into programming. Was a lot of times they'd post things that I couldn't do. I didn't have the equipment, or I couldn't do them myself because I wasn't fit enough yet. I hadn't been training in this style enough yet. So there was a lot of modifications. And so that's when I started experimenting with different types of modification to make it work for me. Fast forward, my first kind of big injury that I had actually wasn't from CrossFit. It was actually, I was teaching a kickboxing class, and I was demonstrating skipping knees, which is where you skip and you get more power if you do that. And, alternating legs. And I felt and I heard a popping, tearing sound. And it was actually, and I felt it in my back. And so I kind of stopped and just kept coaching the class or whatever, and was like, oh, that's not right. And again, remember, I'm like 24, 25 at this time. And so I just sort of like nursed myself a little bit, and kind of wore like a back brace, and didn't see any doctors or anything. And over, actually, no, I did eventually go, because it was kind of like not going away after months. And it was really bad when I stood up from seated. I went into a chiropractor and, got electric stim and adjustments, and spent thousands of dollars and got nowhere. And finally, I went to the first CrossFit running cert with Brian McKenzie. And it was before it was open to the public. I got an invite because I was a coach that they wanted my opinion just to help make the course better before they put it out to everybody. And there was a chiropractor there who was also a CrossFitter. And I explained to him the symptoms. And he said, oh, yeah, that's your psoas. And I was like, my what? What'd you call me? I didn't know what a psoas was at the time. And so a psoas muscle is a muscle it's a two-part muscle, but essentially it's either we're going to raise your leg, so bringing your knee up, or it's one of the muscles that we do use when during trunk flexion, like sitting up. And so it attaches from your femur up to your spine. And so I had partially tore or at least sprained that psoas, which was pulling on my back, my spine. And so I learned some stretches, but what I didn't do was more extensive prehab around activating. So it was really just more of the stretching part. And so especially at the time, I was still working as an engineer, so I was sitting down all day. I was doing martial arts and CrossFit, and then sitting all day. And so my back, I slowly got it back to where it was healthy, and I just dealt with it. I just kind of had this back pain, and as long as I stretched and everything else, it was fine. And we'll come back to that in a moment. The next biggest injury I had was I was doing an Olympic lifting seminar. So again, not doing CrossFit. After 2 days, it was two full days, and at the end of Sunday, for example, we were trying to see where our snatch was, and I was being stubborn, and I kept failing at over 200 pounds or something like that, like 205 or 215. And the bar started to go behind me, and I tried to bring it forward. And there's a muscle called a subscapularis, which is one that attaches behind your shoulder blade to your arm. And I felt it pop. And then what was funny was where I really noticed it was when I reached across to undo my seatbelt with my left arm to push the button, like that pushing down is that muscle, and I couldn't do it. It hurt, and so that sidelined me for a little while. So again, not necessarily doing CrossFit. The other thing I remember being sidelined for a little while was I was doing a Turkish get-up, and I worked up to where I needed a barbell. So I was trying to do 135, and so I had the bar. You have to hold it in the middle of the bar, and you start to stand up, and you have your arm raised up way over your head. And I did it fine with my right arm, and so I went to do it with my left. And I kind of lost it a little bit, and I came down. Well, my forearm is bigger than the diameter of a bumper plate. So you can imagine when I came down on my elbow hit, and the bumpers weren't touching. And so then it totally tweaked my wrist, bent my wrist backwards. And I just remember being really frustrated with that, because it's like when, including like when I initially injured my back, again, lots of substitutions, because when you have a back injury, it's like, what can you do? Same thing with a wrist injury. At least you can use your other arm and you can use your lower body. But when I hurt my back, I had to do a lot. I did a lot of grip training, because I was like, what else can I do? Now that was a quasi CrossFit injury. It was still just more of a stupid human trick. It wasn't actually doing a Metcon. And other than a few torn hands and that I will say this is a direct CrossFit injury that I did get, which was I got blood poisoning. So I was doing the 30 muscle ups for time workout, which is a CrossFit classic that isn't really a workout. It's more of a test, and it's an advanced test, because if you can't do muscle ups, then what's the point? And so I was doing this 30 muscle ups for time workout, and I got if you're doing muscle ups with a false grip, that's where you hold the ring below the heel of your hand. And so I tore both my wrists, got where I ripped the skin. And so, but I kept going, because yay, fitness, right? I don't know. I didn't know at the time, so I just kept going, and didn't think much of it. But of course, how often do you really clean those rings? At the time, I don't even think we were ever really cleaning them, wiping them down or anything. And so I remember this specifically because my wife was pregnant with our son at the time, and we had to go to one of our birthing classes, right? One of the parenting classes. And so I did that workout like that day or the day before. And I had my wrists all, bandaged up or whatever. And I went and I started feeling really off, and started having a fever, and was, had to sit through this class and had this fever. We went straight to the hospital, and I had the streaking up the arm. So I had blood poisoning where of course if that reaches, your heart, it can be really, really dangerous. And that was, again, that was ego. We didn't know it at the time. If you rip your hands or something like that, you try to keep going because I don't want to stop my workout. And, just learning that lesson, like, what's the point? Like, you're not winning any medals. There's no money on the line. Like, why do people keep going when something hurt? I tweak my shoulder or I rip my hand. I got to keep going. And so, learning that was, I think, a really important lesson to then make sure that within the gym culture, we didn't promote that sort of activity or that behavior. And then not really taking any other injuries. My shoulders are extremely bulletproof. Like I signed up for a challenge with other CrossFitters around the world where we wanted to do 50 consecutive kipping pull-ups, and we had a deadline. And so I trained for that, and I was doing, I would do sets of 30 toward the end of this challenge, where I would do it throughout the day. So I do it first thing in the morning, I do it at lunch, I do it after work, I do it before bed, and I'd rep out 20, 30, 35 pull-ups in a row kipping. So I was doing 100, sometimes 100, 150 pull-ups a day, every day. And my shoulders are fine, right? And when the test came, I did 54 pull-ups in a row. And I repeated that even years later. I just, without really a lot of training, I could still get to 45 to 50 pull-ups pretty consistently. And my shoulders are fine. So, I didn't have any shoulder pathology before that. I had really flexible shoulders from all the martial arts, and I maintained my shoulder flexibility throughout CrossFit. And so I never really had any shoulder issues other than that subscapularis injury that I got from Olympic weightlifting. My elbows are fine, my knees are fine, but this back injury kept kind of coming up, it just kept coming up. And finally, I got an x-ray, and my L3 vertebrae over the last 15 years has migrated to the side. So it has shifted laterally a 1/4 of an inch, and the disc is still intact. There's no evidence of a bulging disc or anything like that. But what happened was, because my body was trying to protect that injury, I started moving differently, and I started favoring one side, and that those muscles became tighter and tighter, and my body would grab sooner, and so that pulled that vertebrae over to the side, and that meant my other side, my left side, had to work a lot harder. And so I had a definite muscle imbalance in my spinal erectors. Looking at my back, you'd see that my left side was more larger and more developed. And eventually, again, starting to approach, my mid 30s and upper 30s, I got my back went out in a workout. It happened to have toes to bar and box jumps and some snatches. I remember the workout specifically, and it was fun. I kind of did something weird in the workout, no big deal. I had some meetings, and it was starting to lock up. And so I started doing these rehab things that I learned doing the functional movement screen, the FMS test, where they had actually diagnosed it a little bit. And so I kind of knew about it. And so I started doing these rehab exercises, thinking it would help calm it down or make it better. Well, if I just injured it and made it angry, doing those exercises just made it worse, right? And so then, like, later that day, I could barely stand up, right? I had to lay down, and I was sidelined for a few days. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Slowly worked back into my training. 3 or 4 weeks later, it happened again. And then again. And over a period of a year, my back went out probably 4 or 5 times. And this is back in like 2014, 15. And I was still training somewhat competitively, so still lifting some pretty big weights and keeping a moderate training volume. But I realized I couldn't do that anymore. And instead of doubling down on the rehab, I decided to just not train as much. Which was a mistake. And I was really focusing on business stuff. And so my fitness wasn't a priority. And I've talked about this before, but I actually hate exercising. That's why I'm so passionate about programming, is because with the proper programming, you can work out as little as possible and still get the maximum amount of results, right? And so what I was able to do was maintain a pretty good level of fitness without having to squat heavy or do these movements that made my back angry. And I was still able to maintain a pretty good level of body fat. I'm still able to do all the fun things like, snowboarding and wakeboarding and hiking and all the things I love outside of the gym, just training 2 to 3 days a week, right? And working around this injury by scaling and modifying. So it's one benefit of being a programmer, is I can always make up a workout, whether I'm in a hotel or in some limited space, and all I have is a dumbbell. I can always make up a decent Metcon or do some basic movements no matter where I'm at, even with my limitation of my back. And then now here we are, 4 or 5 years after that injury, and I've actually just in the last 6 months or so finally sat down and it's like, you know what, I'm going to do my rehab every day. I'm going to start training again. I'm going to start lifting, and I'm getting back now. So I finally feel like after this long journey, that back injury, what I will say about all my injuries is what the benefit of CrossFit is you can keep training. You can work around things, and there's no reason why you don't just stop living if you sprain your ankle. Oh, that was another one, was I broke my ankle at the Tough Mudder, which was a whole another long story. But ended up in a cam boot, those plastic boots, for 12 weeks. And I still trained, right? And I worked around it. And I was still able to maintain my fitness and even make gains during that 12 weeks. But and so that's kind of the idea, is that CrossFitters have this reputation for getting injured, but I also think that CrossFitters are just more active, right? When people start to get their fitness level to where they can do these fun adventures and go out and do things, they're going to go out and do skiing and snowboarding and all these, play in the softball league. We had more people injured, are doing one season of recreational softball. We set up our own softball team, the Diablo CrossFit softball team. We had so many people, we had to have 2 teams in the same league. And, so there was like 40 people or something like that. But I think we had 6 people get pretty badly injured. And that was like more people that had been hurt than in the last like 3 years of owning a gym. Like more people got hurt doing softball than 3 years of CrossFit. One season of softball. And so, you get this reputation for CrossFit being dangerous. And it's like, yes, CrossFit's dangerous if it's a poorly designed workout, if it's a poorly designed programming, or day to day, you're not taking that stuff into account. If people aren't being coached, if people are doing movements improperly, and like, yes, they can be dangerous. But I think that the injury rates actually come from just CrossFitters go do more stuff. So they don't actually get hurt doing CrossFit. They get hurt doing these other activities, which is just part of being active. Like if you're going to go out and do fun things, you're going to get tweaked every once in a while. Right. And so now I'm at this point where and this speaks to Thrivestry. How do I create programming that, again, can give you for the least amount of effort, you can get the maximum amount of return on investment, right? You get the maximum results. And I think that this is where most people are at. They're not looking to compete. They're not looking to, and it's okay if you do that. You can use this as a springboard to go into competitions. But I think most people are like, again, how little can I exercise, or how few times per week can I go to the gym and still see results? And that's kind of where I'm at with my fitness, where, I like walking around with a 6-pack, and I like looking fit and everything. But I don't want to spend, 2 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week to do that. So now I'm training. I usually try to work out 3 days a week, where I do kind of lifting and or Metcon. And then once a week I try to get outside, right? So I try to go for a hike, do a ruck hike, or just go for a jog. Try to do a lot of trail running when I can. And then I just look for little areas where I can use my body, whether it's taking the stairs or parking far away, and all those little things. And all that stuff adds up. And it's, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at right now. After 15 years, and what Gigi mentioned too was I have friends that I did martial arts with 15 years ago when I started. And I have friends that I went to college with 15 years ago, or 16 or 17 years ago. And when you look at those people and you compare them to where I'm at, I am definitely I would be a totally different person if I looked like them, right? A lot of them have put on 30, 40 pounds. They're starting to really feel their age, versus like me, people are shocked to find out how old I am. And I'm still, able to do all these fun things. And I don't feel like I have to like slow down, which I think is really important. Gigi hasn't said anything for like 10 minutes. And
Saga, the odyssey of JJ's CrossFit adventure.
Well, and like I said, I do plan on doing some before and after photos, and I do want to talk about this in this article. So look forward to that. And hopefully you guys can learn a few things about training, and I'll have some hardcore lessons to be in there. And there's one really big thing that I've learned that is important part of my training right now, but it's still in top secret phase and testing. And so I won't be announcing that until we have more data and I have more of a program that you guys can check out. So if you see me posting things like, oh, I'm looking for volunteers for a special program, and you're interested in kind of finding out what it is, definitely sign up for that, because I'm still going to be doing some testing and everything. But I got to give it to my special guys first, so that they get the leg up. Ooh.
So exciting. I think I know what it is, so maybe I'm not as excited.
Yeah, you know what it is. We talked about it.
It is? Okay, yeah. Well, I think it is exciting, and it's based on like a whole new theory, I guess, right? So, but anyway, to wrap up like the 15 years of CrossFit, you kind of touched on it at the end there, but I always think that the most important thing is to think, if you didn't do this, where would you be right now? Right? Like, and it's that difference of, 24 to 40 is a lot of life changes happen, right? Like you buy your first house and you have kids and life takes a toll on you. You're not in your prime earning years yet. So there's like financial stress oftentimes, right? And when you look at the people who are regularly exercising in something that's so effective of CrossFit with Thrivestry programming, the effects are just so different, and you can live the life that you want to live as opposed to just reacting, which is kind of, it all goes back to that OODA loop thing. But yeah, and I always think that the cool thing too is that you don't work out 7-8 hours every week, right? Like it doesn't take much if you're on the right program. And it is the rest of your life that you're talking about. It's not just, well, I know so many people that are like, well, I need to get in shape for this wedding, or I'm going on vacation and I want to be in good shape for the vacation. But it's like, no, man, you got to be in shape just for you, for your life, because this is the only one you've got, right? So good story.
Yeah. And like I said, I'll have more details kind of going into that article that I've started writing. But yeah, so let's talk about season 2. So season 2.
Oh, great.
So season 1, like I said, has been more about sort of habits and sort of concepts around identity, and also analyzing articles and research we found online. And so we find an interesting article and we bring it up and kind of take it apart. What I really liked about it was because I get these questions all the time from folks they'll see some new study, and there'll be some new fad that's going through the internet about nutrition or health or sleep or whatever. And I like being able to take those studies apart a little bit, maybe theorize around what's really going on, or maybe what are the limitations. Maybe they did this study, but they had limitations on the number of people they did, or things they didn't think about when they were doing their study. So I think that does help kind of people understand that research is really just sort of a signpost pointing in different directions, and that doesn't mean it's exactly the way things work, right? Because everybody's their own personal experiment, right? And so just following, take this new thing, it'll lose weight, or what's like the clickbaity, like this one tip to lose belly fat, or whatever, And so it's never really that simple, but it still gives us an idea where we can find these sort of underlying principles that we can put on our list of principles that help us live a better life. Now season 2 is going to have a lot more programming stuff. So one of the things that I do in every day is I create videos and programming stuff that's for subscribers, and so it's really for the coaches and the gym owners to help run their gyms better, to deliver a better class experience. And I talk about some of the theory of why in those videos, but I want to explain more to where everybody can take advantage of that. So if you guys have questions about the programming, I'm going to be fielding more questions in the next season, where I'm going to take questions from you guys and say, and we can talk about it for, to go into detail about why it's set up this way, because everything I do is very deliberate. So there's very specific, whether it's, the order of the movements in a workout, or the scaling guide and how much time, to, why why we use scaling options called health athletic performance versus advanced intermediate novice. There's details there that I think are really important, and that people can, if they understand it, I think they'll appreciate the programming more and maybe get more out of it. So that's going to be one of the themes going into season 2. I do plan on having some special guests come in season 2, and then Gigi had an idea about season 2 as well. What was the idea you were?
The Mythbusters idea? Mythbusters?
Yeah. So we want to take some of these prevailing wisdoms, these myths that we sort of accept about health and fitness, and sort of bust the myth or confirm it. We'll talk about things like keto. We'll talk about cardio and strength training, and we'll talk about these things that I think there's still a lot of regular gym people, but also CrossFit gym people sort of subscribe to, and we'll sort of break it down and say, okay, this is what's really going on. So you can make smarter decisions about your training.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of that in season 1, but that wasn't like the specific focus. Like, we did an article once that talked about the benefits of strength training before cardio, things like that. So we've kind of dabbled in this already, but I think it would be really cool to have a whole season dedicated to it, because there's so much out there. And I know that it helps me when I talk to people who don't do what I do for exercise, to be able to have a little bit more ammo to say, like, yeah, I love that you run every day, but like, weightlifting and the benefits and all this kind of stuff, right? So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's cool. And do you remember that? I remembered as we were talking here what the second idea was, and I don't think you're going to do it because it is too much work, but I wanted to make video game avatars for all of our different remember that? All of the different workout types out there. So you could see, like, how like an avatar on a video game has different health points and different strength and defensive and offensive, and video game, or like role player games. Is that what you call them? Dice games, whatever. My brother would kill me for not knowing what they're called.
Role playing games, yeah. Well, you have the characteristics, right? So if you were to list the 10 physical skills that CrossFit has subscribed to, I think Jim Crawley was the guy that first came up with it. But strength, speed, flexibility, coordination, balance, agility. These 10 physical skills. You could have like a bar on a scale of 1 to 10. Where do you lie on each one of those things? And so you could break that down. And the level method guys have their version of that for CrossFit, where they have, I think, 16 different characteristics that they track, and they have specific tests, and then you get like a level. So you might be, a blue in this thing and a white in this thing and whatever. But it would be basically not for, we would make this not for CrossFitters, or there would be one that's kind of the Thrivestry person, but then it would have like the yoga person, the running person, the bro lifting in the gym person. You could create all these different like characters, and they'd have different stats. And so we might go into that and break them down, and talk about the strengths, the benefits, and maybe the disadvantages of sticking to that sort of training. One of the things that I think is really common with CrossFitters is that they after doing CrossFit for a number of years, then they start going like, well, maybe I should do cycling. And then suddenly they play with cycling for a while. But you have to be careful, where if you go too far off into that realm, you forget about all the other benefits that you were getting by doing consistent CrossFit training. And so that's why you need to maintain, these other skills. It's okay to specialize, but if you can keep just, one toe in the water on these other characteristics, it makes it a lot easier to come back and then go somewhere else, versus kind of going off the rails and turning into a extreme endurance person, or just doing lifting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and obviously every workout regime has benefits, because otherwise it would never catch on, right? And there's, I'm sure we'll touch on this, but every time you start something new, there's always like a 3-month window where you will always see results, regardless of what you're doing. So, but it's will you still have those consistent results after 3 months or 15 years? And not have any kind of wear and tear or repetitive strain injuries or anything like that. So I'm excited for that. I think that'll be really, really cool. And that's it. Are we done? Anything else?
This is the season is over. All right, season 1 is done. We're gonna take a short break, so it'll be 2 or 3 weeks before our next podcast. And like I said, definitely tune in for that, because there's going to be some surprises not just the new content, but also some other interesting fun things that I'll get to announce once I get them confirmed. So thanks again for listening in, guys. Please like, share, subscribe, send all that stuff out to everybody. Especially, save the ones that you keep repeating yourself, with clients. Sometimes, for you guys who are coaches, or people who are you're the fitness expert of all your friends, if you find a podcast that is really that you can share with somebody else, coming from someone else, sometimes it helps if they hear it from the horse's mouth. Maybe that can, instead of hearing it from their buddy or their coach, sometimes it can have a bigger impact. So definitely keep sharing those podcasts that you really enjoy, and start sending me your questions. So again, if you have questions around the programming, around fitness, all that stuff, shoot them our way, and then we will tackle them in season 2. Thanks a lot, guys. Thrive on. Bye. Say bye, Gigi.
Bye.